The fate of the entire elven race is in your hands.
Whose hands?
Yours.
Hey everybody, welcome to ScreenCrush. I'm Doug. Ryan's on vacation, and this are the Easter eggs and references in the new episode of Rings of Power. Oh, I'm kind of nervous. I don't really want to do this.
Hello, Doug. I'm Brian. May I be of assistance?
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you.
All right, then. Welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Brian Silliman, temporarily filling in for Ryan Arey, and these are all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things that you may have missed from Episode 5 of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. The episode is titled Partings, which may be a nod to the chapter in the Book of Return of the King called Many Partings. While it is a literal reference in this episode to certain characters and groups of characters parting ways, it is also evocative of how many of them seek to part with their past misdeeds. When Nori teaches the stranger some words, she begins with migration.
Means like to move. What we do, Harfoot.
They wander, and as their way is now the stranger's way, this continues to add evidence on the ever-growing pile that the stranger is Gandalf the Grey, arriving in Middle-earth an age earlier than Tolkien had him arriving. Gandalf was known as the Wandering Wizard, and of the 5 Istari, was the only one that we get to know who never planted roots anywhere. Saruman settled at Isengard, and Radagast stayed close to Rhosgobel. Tolkien wrote that the Blue Wizards went into the east with Saruman and were never heard from again, so who knows what happened to them. Gandalf learning about wandering and migration this early on makes sense, because that becomes his way of life. It isn't an easy life, as we know that Gandalf is no stranger to trouble. Nori introduces that concept to him in this scene as well.
Perils?
Like a danger.
The stranger doesn't seem to know what death is, which would track with him potentially being a Maiar, and he has no idea that he caused the death of the Firefly. The way he reacts to this makes it clear that it was an accident. He is not in full control of his powers. To make something dead, as Nori puts it, is the opposite of life. That's the ultimate parting in many ways. There's also the parting ways of good and evil, and many characters in this episode who think that they are good prove to be anything but.
When all this is ended, elves will take orders from us.
Characters that are scared of what they could become are a different story.
When these people discover it, they will cast me out.
The stranger is worried that he himself is peril.
I'm peril.
But Nori is certain that he's anything but.
You're not a peril. You're good.
I'm good.
The stranger struggles to understand the concept, showing that for now, at least he has a simpler mind than many others on this show.
I'm good.
I'm good too.
Yes, you are. To smash the Gandalf hammer even more, the shot of Nori and the stranger looks just like this shot of Gandalf and Bilbo from the 3rd Hobbit movie. We haven't mentioned this theory yet, but it's going around, so we'll do it now. It's not ours, but it's great all the same. We'd bet all of the money in your wallets that the wheels on the Harfoot carts will eventually become the doors of hobbit holes. They are wandering now, but they will eventually settle. Their wheels keep them in motion, constantly moving from peril. Eventually, they will become doors to keep the peril out. And yes, that peril includes the Sackville Bagginses. Poppy got the song that she sings from her mother, who was left behind. Her singing it as the group travels ever on evokes many of Tolkien's own traveling songs. The theme of wandering once again comes up often in the lines of the song, which is probably the most beautiful moment that the show has given us thus far. The final line of the song also happens to be right from Tolkien. In the book The Fellowship of the Ring, Gandalf includes a few lines of a poem in a letter to Frodo, intending the lines to get Frodo to trust Strider. The poem is a reworking of an older work of Tolkien's, which he updates to start, "All that is gold does not glitter, not all those who wander are lost." It is revealed later that these lines were written about Aragorn by Bilbo Baggins, so, theoretically, Bilbo could have taken that line from this older Harfoot song. Gandalf's use of it could also now have a deeper meaning. The last lines of the poem are spoken by Arwen in the movie Return of the King.
Renewed shall be blade that was broken, the crownless again shall be king.
At the same time that the song ends and the stranger looks up at the moon, we immediately cut to the crater where the stranger fell. Who are the white-clad, ominous beings that seem worried about the crater, and what might it mean?
It's gotta be Sauron.
Possibly. The nefarious whispering is not a good sign, and the creep factor of these white-robed people is also troubling. One of them could definitely be Sauron, currently in his beautiful form of Anatar, the guise he takes on when he wants to trick people. Captain Buzzcut here could be Anatar, but but he looks like he just burned down a banana republic full of kittens. That's not gonna trick anyone.
Maniacal laugh.
We're going to guess that these folk are at the very least in league with Sauron. Also on the evil side is Adar, who shows that although he's corrupted, he's able to endure the sunlight. We know that his orcs are not, but Adar seems to be working on a way to rectify that. We know that Saruman will eventually make that happen with the Uruk-hai.
He's breeding an army in the caverns of Isengard. An army that can move in sunlight.
While looking at the sun, Adar seems sad about the loss of the side of him that was full of light. Adar may be an invention of the show, but Tolkien's lore did contain one elf who fully became a servant of Morgoth. The elf Maeglin betrayed his people and made the fall of Gondolin possible, though he himself was thrown down into fire at the end. It is a stretch, but it might be possible that Adar is Maeglin, who somehow survived.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
He would have been badly burned, and this would explain the scarring. With Morgoth gone, a returning Maeglin would naturally either turn to Sauron or go into business for himself. When Bronwyn addresses the Southlanders and gives Adar's terms, she refers to the king they have awaited, who may be Halbrand. Though the elvish watchtower that they are using as a fortress was once a symbol of shame to the men who stood with Morgoth, Bronwyn seeks to part with that history and transform the tower into something more.
This tower will no longer be a reminder of our frailty, but a symbol of our strength.
It seems like the Southlanders are going to unite and fight as hands go up in support, mirroring the Numenoreans in Episode 4. It doesn't go the same way, however, as Waldreg steps up and gives a voice of dissent. The elves were right to watch these people because not all of them have learned from the past, even after all of this time. Half of them follow Waldreg to pledge fealty to Adar, ready to make the same mistakes again.
I am ready to get hurt again.
Numenoreans may have looked united, but they have resentments and schemes among them all that seek to tear them apart. Isildur, always ambitious, has forsaken going into the west of Numenor and wants in on this mission.
Slip me to the front of the line.
As usual, Isildur wants power that he has not yet earned. Many of the wealthy-looking Numenoreans show that they don't support joining the fight, and they prove as much when they yell questions to Pharazôn. They likely cannot see any upside in this for them, so why would they go? Elendil's daughter Eärien doesn't support it either, but this may be because she doesn't want to lose another parent. Pharazôn's son, Caiman, agrees with her. Halbrand at his forge definitely makes us think of Narsil being reforged in the Return of the King movie. And as he is a king of some kind who is about to be pressured and guilted into returning, this makes sense. He may be a king, but he's a very good blacksmith.
I'm a very good tailor.
He's able to show Miriel and Pharazôn that the enemy is likely headed for the Elvish Watchtower, which could point to the Numenoreans giving the Southlanders a last-minute save in their upcoming battle. The fact that Halbrand is going back to Middle-earth with the Numenorean forces is definitely news to him.
I'm certain your fellowship will prove just as invaluable once you make landfall.
Landfall.
Where Elrond gently nudged Aragorn to take up his true destiny in the movie of Fellowship of the Ring,
You are the last of that bloodline. There is no other.
Galadriel is just making the choice for Halbrand without asking him.
I have no doubt, come time, he will do his part.
He doesn't appreciate it and once again uses his sigil pouch as a symbol of his higher purpose.
Find another head to crown.
When the Harfoots find the woods they are traveling in less giving than usual, we are reminded of the falling infected leaf in the premiere episode, as well as how Greenwood the Great eventually becomes the poisonous Mirkwood in The Hobbit.
These woods have never been this bare at this time of year.
We are also reminded of one of Treebeard's lines in the movie of the Two Towers.
The withering of all woods is drawing near.
These woods are not going bare because of the rise of industry.
The old world will burn in the fires of industry.
It is nature itself that is festering. When Sadok is made to think that all of this is related to the stranger traveling with them, he is reminded of the greater good.
How can this be for the greater good? The greater good. Shut it!
It seems cold for the Harfoots to leave anyone behind, but the perils they face make it necessary for the whole.
What's it gonna take? Make a widow of somebody? Or an orphan?
Theoretical peril becomes literal peril when wolves attack the Harfoots. But that's when the stranger proves how useful he can truly be. They shall not pass. This injures the stranger's hand, which may be why Gandalf decides to start using a staff. He should start using his staff if he is, in fact, Gandalf. I should say it's still up in the air.
And then I said to myself, how would I do that?
Unlike the Harfoots, Elendil tells his training soldiers to hold their ground. Galadriel makes a reference to stone giants, something that we see in the first Hobbit movie.
The legends are true! Giants! Stone giants!
She also knows that holding your ground and using brute strength will not help you defeat an orc. She has a lot of experience fighting them, and these children of summer have absolutely none. Elendil is wise and modest enough to ask her to help out.
But for you, I will keep it strong and simple. Stab, twist, gut.
Many of these Numenoreans may only have heard stories about elves and have never seen what an elf can truly do in a fight. There is wonder all around as Galadriel takes on multiple opponents with almost no effort, telling them that movement, maneuvering, and balance are what will put them ahead. It took 5 episodes, but we get a serious sword fight, and it is gorgeous. Isildur's friend Valandil is the only one who barely manages to scratch Galadriel, so he gets the prize of being made a lieutenant in the Sea Guard. Translated from Elvish, the name Valandil means friend of the Valar. In Tolkien's writing, it is also the name of Isildur's youngest son, in the same line of kings as Aragorn. Isildur may end up naming his future son after this specific friend. When Halbrand can't help but show off, Galadriel can't help but notice. Caiman tries to talk his father Pharazôn into stirring up opposition to the upcoming journey, but he is not impressed.
Sometimes the folly of youth is enough to make an old man weep.
No doubt it is the folly of youth, which is all men in comparison, is enough to make the elves weep.
My father would sooner die than take orders from an elf.
Caiman is worried about war, casualties, and being of service to elves. Pharazôn is an older and more slippery game player, and he's thinking much larger.
Soon we will save the low men of Middle-earth and give them the king they've long awaited, a king who will be forever in our debt.
Hey, did Tolkien ever write about the Numernorians ever going to Middle-earth?
I'm glad you asked, Doug. Now is a fine time to mention how this series is compressing and shifting the timelines in terms of Numenorian excursions to Middle-earth. Tolkien wrote that they did travel to Middle-earth on several occasions, at first because they were banned from going to Valinor, and there was nowhere else to explore. They visited Lindon, made friends with High King Gil-galad, and eventually went to war alongside him after Sauron re-emerged. Many battles ensued, and Sauron became determined to ruin them after he was forced to retreat to Mordor. The resentment of elves and the Valar mostly began after this point, with the Numenoreans being divided into the faction of elf friends and the King's Men. Some of these King's Men settled Umbar in Middle-earth, the corsairs of which are shown in the movie of Return of the King. The faithful began to be persecuted, and the Eldar no longer visited Numenor. Tar Palantir sought to regain the favor of the Valar and repent, something that is kind of touched on in this series. A major landing of Numenorean forces under Pharazôn took place later on, and while this was a supposed victory, Sauron managed to turn it to his advantage.
So which Numenorean trip to Middle-earth is this?
At this point, who knows? Elendil is involved here, which he usually isn't. That much we know. As for the rest, the series will no doubt continue to pick and choose its battles, literally. Miriel telling Tar Palantir that they are doing this to rekindle their relationship with the elves kind of tracks with all of that, but he has the gift of foresight and asks one thing of her.
Don't go.
Is he talking about Miriel specifically, or the people of Numenor in general? Tolkien didn't specifically write that Miriel never went to Middle-earth, but she has a lot of story left for her in Numenor itself. As for Numenorians going to Middle-earth in this period, well, Galadriel might want it, but it may not be the best decision in the long run.
Not great, Bob.
Phew.
When you're right, Doug. When the stranger mumbles odd words trying to heal his hand, we couldn't help but think of this. Nori gets caught up in his magic, but again, we don't think that he intends this to happen. We will admit, though, his scream here is a little similar to this. We'll say it's a little closer to this, because it helps our case more than that one does. As Nori runs, afraid of him for the first time, the stranger seems to realize that he's gone too far. Is he really as good as Nori thought? Maybe. Maybe not. Gil-galad makes a reference to Aule when he hosts Prince Durin in Lindon.
Your furnaces are said to be burning as bright as the eyes of Aule himself.
You'll remember that Aule is one of the Valar and the one who created the dwarves in the first place. Durin shows more decorum than the dwarves in the first Hobbit movie showed in Rivendell.
Where's the meat? Have they got any chips?
But Durin is definitely still gonna Durin.
Bit southern for elves, no?
Though Gil-galad has questions for Durin, Durin himself is able to get the upper hand on Gil-galad, telling him that the stone table he is using is made from stone that the dwarves consider sacred. You find out later that this isn't at all true. Durin just wanted to give his wife a new table. Still, it shows how little the elves truly know about dwarven culture, save for a specific stone that is most important to them.
It's good to know there's still some honor left among the elves.
It's only after this dinner that Elrond and High King Gil-galad have it out. The king doesn't like Elrond's loyalty to Durin, but Elrond doesn't like that he was used as a pawn by both Gil-galad and Celebrimbor to get the truth of the mithril secret. Gil-galad lets Elrond and the audience know of his true concerns, having Elrond recount a legend that is thought to be apocryphal. He calls Elrond Peridel along the way, which translates to half-elven. According to the series, this legend revolves around a tree, and the roots of this tree were one of the lost Silmarils. It was the resulting light that found its way into the Misty Mountains itself and created mithril.
Boy, this is a lot to unpack.
You ain't kidding. This story is mostly an invention of the show, but it uses enough of existing Tolkien lore that it goes down semi-smooth. Tolkien never wrote that one of the 3 Silmarils, the precious stones that held the remaining light of the 2 trees, ever found its way to the base of a tree at the top of the Misty Mountains. One of them ended up with Elendil the Mariner, one was thrown into the sea, and one was thrown into a fiery chasm. This is an age later, so the fiery chasm Silmaril might, and that's a strong might, have ended up here? I don't know. Manwë is mentioned, and he is the king of the Valar and brother to Melkor, who eventually became Morgoth. He never understood evil, and he always gave his brother too much leeway. Tolkien originally wrote of an event called the Final Battle, or the Dagarath, which is an apocalyptic event where Morgoth would return and Manwë would battle him personally. Christopher Tolkien maintained that Tolkien had abandoned the concept of this entire prophecy. A Balrog of Morgoth is both mentioned and seen, and you'll remember one of those from The Fellowship of the Ring.
A Balrog.
The look of this Balrog, complete with fiery whip, is very similar to what we see in the movies. Balrogs were Maiar spirits that were corrupted by Morgoth, and some of them still exist in Middle-earth. They don't just fight physically, they are powerful sorcerers in their own right, and in the Book of Fellowship, Gandalf trades many spells back and forth with the Balrog that the company encounters. The look of the lightning that ensnared the tree evokes the 2 trees of Valinor, as well as the image of the trees that we see in the opening credits of the show. As for this being the birth of mithril,
it never happened.
Tolkien never directly connected mithril to the light of the Silmarils. This is an Amazon thing. The reason that Gil-galad sent Elrond to Khazad-dûm was to discover this secret.
Then you admit the dwarves did find it, the ore containing the light of the lost Silmaril.
Elrond is determined to keep his promise to Durin, but Gil-galad lays out how all of this is connected to the eventual doom of the elves. It's not only a single leaf that has been corrupted, it's the entire tree, making us remember the poisoning of the 2 trees which we saw at the beginning of the series. Just in case the symbolism isn't clear, Gil-galad tells us what it all means. The light of the Eldar is fading. Leaving Middle-earth is not an option for Gil-galad yet, because the growing evil will spread and wipe everything out. He's not ready to abandon literally everyone on Middle-earth yet. He ties all of this into Elrond breaking his promise to Durin and telling him about the suddenly magical mithril. He uses talk of hope to do it.
Hope is never mere, Elrond, even when it is meager.
Once again, it's about the greater good.
Shut it!
When Isildur asks Valandil to use his newfound status to get him on the expedition, he does apologize, but that's not enough. Isildur says it'll be different, but he has shown that his patterns of behavior will never really change. As Valandil tells him,
"One day, I hope you find something that you would be willing to sacrifice anything for."
His hope for Isildur will eventually manifest, no question. Isildur and Cayman have more in common than we thought, as they both end up on a ship, Cayman there to burn it, and Isildur there stowing away. After a tussle with a lantern, the ship blows up. Their lie is that Isildur saved Cayman, so Isildur begins his long streak of pulling victory from the jaws of defeat. Taking this as potential sabotage and not the work of two morons, we see Miriel now questioning the entire enterprise. Pharazôn is restraining her on one shoulder, and Galadriel is pushing her on the other. When Elrond questions Celebrimbor about the mithril, he asks if it truly is the only salvation for the elves, and Celebrimbor tells him this cockamamie plan, which so far has nothing to do at all with any rings whatsoever. Whatever you say, Celebrimbor. Saturating every elf in the light of the Valar might eventually lead to the creation of 3 elven rings, we guess? All of this talk from both Gil-galad and Celebrimbor is a means to get Elrond to break his oath, and both have already lied to him. This entire story could be a lie that was made up to scare Elrond into telling them what he knows. It could also just be something that was made up by the showrunners.
This one was invented by a writer.
Celebrimbor talking about Elrond's father, Elendil the Mariner, is a means to push him even further. Though he calls Elendil a mortal man, he was half-elf. The legend that Celebrimbor tells is true to Tolkien, however. He wrote that Elendil and his wife, and Elrond's mother, Elwing, sought out the Valar directly, imploring them to intercede in the fight against Morgoth in the War of Wrath. They accepted his plea and came to Middle-earth. On this series, Celebrimbor gives a little more detail about Elwing asking Elendil why he had to be the one to undertake this mission.
Why must it be him? Because he was the only one who could do it.
It's a cheap shot from Celebrimbor to use the history of Elrond's own father to wrest information out of him.
Hey, can you talk about Harbrand?
I was just going to. When Galadriel apologizes to Halbrand for including him on the mission without his consent, she keeps pushing him to join his people with hers. He has to remind her that his people fought against hers not that long ago.
You don't know what I did before I ended up on that raft.
Cross-cutting to the men of the Southlands currently joining with Adar lets him know that everything that Halbrand fears is still possible. History is repeating itself whether his people have a king or not. These men are only interested in survival. This was true of Halbrand before, and it's true of this contingent of Southlanders now, bowing before Adar. Halbrand doesn't tell Galadriel specifically what wicked thing he did to survive, but he believes that it is bad enough that his own people and Galadriel will cast him out. When Galadriel quotes her brother's line about darkness, Halbrand doesn't buy it. Why does she keep fighting?
Why do you keep fighting?
Because I cannot stop.
Her pain is revealed to be even deeper than that, especially after her garrison turned on her and Elrond conspired to ship her away.
And each of them acted as they did, because I believed they could no longer distinguish me from the evil I was fighting.
These lines are very telling, as are Galadriel's lines about earning peace in Middle-earth when she hands Halbrand's pouch of destiny back to him. She soon will become a part of the evil that she is fighting, though she won't be aware of it. Not only will she go along with the Rings of Power project once it finally becomes a thing, she will bear one of the 3 elven rings herself, and she will bear it for the rest of her life. Nenya, the Ring of Adamant, might give her the peace that she seeks here, but it will change her.
To bear a ring of power is to be alone.
When Waldreg meets Adar, he says he wants him and his brethren to be lifted up to take their rightful place, which are lines full of pride and based in resentment at having to be watched over by elves for so very long. Like some of the internet, he thinks that Adar is Sauron.
I pledge my loyalty to Sauron.
I think we can officially call it. That theory is toast.
You are Sauron, are you not?
Waldreg is so fickle that he'll serve whoever this guy is, but Adar seems so upset that someone called him Sauron that he forces Waldreg to prove loyalty by killing Rowan. Adar is not Sauron, but whether he's on the Sauron payroll or pursuing his own agenda is still up for debate. When Theo asks Arondir while he is bothering to stay behind with them, it makes us think of the invented moment in the Two Towers movie when a contingent of elves selflessly arrive to aid the Rohirrim at Helm's Deep.
An alliance once existed between elves and men. We come to honor that allegiance.
Half of the Southlanders may have left, but half also stayed, and Theo was one of them. Arondir giving hope to Theo evokes Aragorn during the same for a youngster before the Battle of Helm's Deep begins.
There is always hope.
It is because of this new bond that Theo shows the creepy sword hilt to Arondir, and Arondir recognizes it because he's spent countless years in this tower. He finds an image of it on the wall, and we finally see that the handle of this object has actually been in the shape of the watchtower this entire time. It is a key, which leads to something deep below the tower and was used to enslave the Southlanders. Arondir doesn't know what it specifically does, but he does know full well that Adar wants it.
Our enemy knows your son has what he needs to enact it.
The entire vibe of these scenes is completely reminiscent of the build-up to the Battle of Helm's Deep in the movie of the Two Towers, complete with looks at far-off armies approaching.
Days.
Bronwyn, losing hope and wanting to join with the enemy at the last minute, fits right in with this movie invention as well. Bronwyn says what no one else does. The elves were right to watch them all those years. They are destined for darkness, and there will be no parting with their past. She says it's how we survive, which is a direct echo to Halbrand's lines earlier in the episode. Surviving in the darkness and not in the light also evokes Adar's orcs.
Perhaps that's who we are. Who we will always be.
As Gimli says in Tolkien's writing, faithless is he that says farewell when the road darkens. Arondir knows what's on the line because he mentions how entire continents were lost during the battles with Morgoth. We learned in the prior episode that he is originally from Beleriand, and that was a continent that was lost. He knows of what he speaks. When Durin tells Elrond the truth about the table, Durin makes another reference to Aule before asking Elrond to tell him the truth in a very Durin way.
Give me the meat, and give it to me raw.
Elrond fesses up about the mithril, saying that without it, the elves have until spring. This may be the reason why Celebrimbor was so hot to get his special forge built. The fate of the elves to dwindle, diminish, and to be lost to time recalls what Elrond will say to Arwen much later in the movie of the Two Towers.
Here you will dwell, bound to your grief.
And just like that, the fate of the entire elven race is in Durin's hands. Though there is finally full honesty between Elrond and Durin, Gil-galad watches them from above. We find it all too likely that he has sold the two friends a bursting bill of goods. When Halbrand looks intently on his pouch of destiny, we know that the entire fate of Miriel's expedition rests on his decision for some reason. He parts with his destiny only to rejoin it seconds later. He parts with his blacksmith self and becomes the king that he once was. He pulls an Aragorn yet again.
Now come the days of the king.
Miriel seems to have ignored her father's advice and is armored up and on horseback. It looks like she's going along. Elendil must have forgotten that he had a daughter because both he and Isildur, who ends up being brought along as a stable sweep, ride right past Eärien. The people of Numenor, in their fine armor aboard their fine ships, are a sight to see. But that's nothing compared to the sight of Galadriel walking on the deck in her own armor, with Bear McCreary's music blasting in. We all feel like Gimli when he departs Lothlorien in Fellowship of the Ring.
Except to look upon the lady of the Galadriel one last time.
And so it was that way ahead of schedule, Elendil led a boatload of Numenoreans.
For Middle-earth.
That's all of the Easter eggs we found, but if you found any or want to talk about Zirax-Egil, let us know in the comments below or add me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Brian Silliman.